Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Nerds of Legend. I'm your host, I'm Ben. Next to me is Brian. You may be noticing we're missing a few people this week. Life took over for Brendan and Joel and Missy, and so they're not available. And we're very happy to let everyone know that Joel and Missy's baby arrived safe and sound last Thursday early morning. Her name is Elizabeth, and we'll be very excited to meet her once everything is kind of settled down. But this week we'll be here to talk about The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. Brian is, of course, a horror connoisseur. I am not so much. I have only read the book. And while Brian, obviously, as you can see, is holding the puzzle box itself in his hands and is wearing a merch shirt. So we're both going to have some interesting perspectives because he knows a lot more about this than I do, but I only have the only thing I knew about the Hellraiser series prior to reading this book was something about Pinhead, Hell, and there's a box somewhere in there. But we'll get going, and I'll let Brian take it away.
First and foremost, I want to let all of our viewers know that we are not going to do a spoiler-free section of this particular review. One, because the actual novel itself is actually rather, short, and therefore a non-spoiler section would essentially boil down to, this is character X, and they have motivation X, and then, we'd run out of topics really fucking fast. So we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be jumping straight into spoiler territory. However, one thing that I will give our listeners a little bit of forewarning on is what we will do is give the book a rating first. And that way, you can know before you click away whether or not it's something you even want to seek out. So, Ben, what's your honest rating for this book? Scale to 1 to 10.
So I'm not a big horror fan. This book was pretty good in my opinion for what it is. Going from that, I'll probably give it like a 6 or 7. It's not something I'd typically pick up and read, but I can see the enjoyment in it. I used to read like the no sleep stuff all the time on Reddit, so I kind of like in that horror sort of thing. So it was interesting. There were some problems I had with it, which we'll get into, but that's kind of where I'm landing on my rating here. So
I personally would probably agree with you and give it about a 7 or maybe an 8 at the high end. I think that Clive Barker is a really good writer, and I think that he does a good job of giving you enough detail to kind of put you in the moment of what's going on with the characters, and I really respect that. Yes. As far as the actual content of it, I also think that it's a more subtle read that might be lost on some people, sort of thing, because if you're expecting like the same sort of like horror schlock of like, oh, there's, some sort of like immortal monster or something like that, you're going to be kind of disappointed. This follows the same sort of like Lovecraftian sort of method, wherein like, a lot of the more terrifying stuff is, in the subtext, if you will. You know what I'm saying? Like the big horror movie villains of this particular piece are Frank and Julia. So if you're looking for, a lot of Cenobites or whatnot, I would recommend going to read the Hellraiser comics. Those are actually a lot better in terms of like getting your pure Cenobite, fix in. But if you're looking for that in this, you're going to be kind of disappointed, especially since, as we'll get into, they don't really do anything. The one thing that I will say is that regarding the new Hulu series that's going to be coming out on the subject, and whether or not, because there is some relevancy here, and of course you might not know this because you're not a horror like buff, But there has been some discord about them taking Douglas Bradley and replacing him with a woman. And, there are some people who are kind of up in arms about that. But there is a little bit of precedence for that when it comes to this particular book, because in this, Pinhead is described as female. Mm-hmm. So I guess, mystery solved on that one.
Oh, so is Pinhead the one that actually took him to took Frank finally after his little trip?
In both the book and the movie, Pinhead is kind of like the lead Cenobite. So much so that in the movie, he's not even called Pinhead. Mm-hmm. In the credits, you can see just lead Cenobite, Douglas Bradley. Okay. And then he only actually gets the Pinhead moniker in the second movie.
That was just
for both this and also the movie, he's not really given a name.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess shall we do a little sort of synopsis for our listeners real quick? So
go ahead and give them the rundown.
So pretty much this book is you have this guy Frank, who's basically a complete hedonist. He's experienced every pleasure imaginable. He's basically a horn dog that's done a bunch of drugs and is looking for his next big high. And he ends up solving what's known as the Le Marchand configuration, because it's sort of a mythological importance that if you can solve this puzzle box, you will be visited by the Cenobites, who will give you pleasures beyond your imagination. Little does he know, however, that basically the Cenobites are basically from hell. And they're sort of they're otherworldly immortal beings that don't really recognize the difference between pleasure and pain. And their idea of what gives people pleasure is probably you're not going to like it. So they and that's the last time you see Frank until later on in the movie, where we are replaced with a woman by the name of, it escapes me at the moment. I can't remember what's the first woman's name.
Julia.
Frank, Julia. Yeah. So it follows the point of view of Julia, who is a woman in an unhappy marriage. She joins, who you find out is married to actually Frank's brother. And they move into Frank's house, where they find a room, which is basically where Frank was taken in the first place. And he goes to... she's in an unhappy marriage. She's looking for some sort of way out. She had a brief tryst with Frank in the past before she was married to Rory. And she finds Frank after there's basically there's stuff with blood going on where it allows Frank to manifest. And so she goes on a murder spree where she sacrifices men to Frank by seducing them to her home and killing them. And then Frank basically steals their life energy and is able to come more and more into the physical world. Whereas he first starts, he's basically just eyes and a spine nailed to the wall. And then as this progresses, another woman finds out that what's going on. She's confronted by Frank. Her name is Christy, and she's essentially the protagonist of this book. She's attacked by Frank, ends up in the hospital, but not without escaping with the box, which she then solves. And in order to prevent her from getting the same fate as Frank, she promises to expose Frank to the Cenobites and find him. And then we have a whole action sequence where she finds out that Frank has finally come into full being and has taken Rory's skin and assumed his identity, whereupon he tries to kill her, right before killing Julia, and then Julia gets Frank to reveal that he is indeed Frank and not Rory. Cenobites arrive, mess him up, and Christie escapes with the box. That's sort of a quick synopsis of this little novella. Did I miss anything, Brian, you think?
No, that's pretty apt. I will say that if people are familiar with the movie, they should understand that Rory in this version is the movie's version of Larry. Aside from that, it's a pretty faithful shot-for-shot retelling, if you will. Mm-hmm. And this is because Clive Barker was instrumental in both the book and the movie. Obviously, he wrote the book, but when it comes to the movie that most people are familiar, Hellraiser, he was very instrumental to the screenplay process. So, in both book and movie, they are very similar. So, one of the things that I think we can talk about then are some of the differences between the two. Because I'm sure that a lot of people are going to kind of like wonder, like, okay, well, if it's so similar, then are there any differences? And of course there are. First and foremost, as we mentioned, Douglas Bradley played Pinhead in the movie, whereas in the book, Pinhead is described womanly, if you will. So there's that. Also, the female Cenobite from the movie is just kind of like merged with Pinhead in this one. Like they're both just basically one and the same. So like, and also the Chatterer and Butterball that are kind of like fan favorites and whatnot. Those are given a far less significant role to the point where like they're basically invisible. So if you're looking for your Hellraiser fix in particular, I recommend the comic over this. At any rate, another key difference that we can kind of talk about, and from what I understand, this is the point where we lost our friend Joel.
Yeah,
is the resurrection scene. Or I'm sorry, not the resurrection scene. The scene where Larry is torn apart in the first place. I'm sorry, not Larry.
Where he's taken by the Sevens.
Yeah, where Frank is taken to hell the first time. Yeah. And now, for those of you familiar with the movie, Frank is taken to hell almost instantly. It's like first 5-10 minutes of the movie, bam, he's fucking dead. In the book, it actually draws that process out quite a bit to the point where like he's discovering things about the box. He's talking with the guy who tells him all about it, like the German guy who sells it to him. And so he's learning a lot more about it than he did in the movie, which is partially by design, I think, because I think what Clive Barker really wanted to do was he wanted to show that Frank was dead set on solving the box and like, damn the consequences, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to, go for it. Sort of.
Well, it's interesting because it seems like Frank was misled from a certain perspective about what the Mlamashar configuration brings. He was promised, pleasures beyond his imagination, which I guess technically he got, but...
I mean, there is that whole scene where he's torn apart in the first place.
Yes, so... Basically, what Brian is slightly tiptoeing around is the Cenobites arrive after the box is solved, and Frank is basically exposed to every sense and memory that he has experienced in his entire life. It's sort of like a judgment sequence, if anything. He's every scent, every sound, every smell, every taste, every sight that he's ever experienced, he experiences, but dialed up to like 11,000. So to the point where he's completely like it's pleasure, but at the same time immense pain, because it's like every light is blinding, every stench, every smell is so potent that it is becomes rank. It's like, even if like you enjoy like a certain perfume smell, if you like spray yourself in the nostrils with it, it's gonna like you're gonna hate it. It's and it's he ends up after in order to try to like relieve the pain he's feeling, he ends up furiously masturbating to the point where and then the orgasm he feels causes him to basically just collapse and pass out, at which point he wakes up to the sight of Pinhead.
Now, why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Mm-hmm. Well, this actually gives us one of the major differences from the book to the movie. And not just the fact that, like, the movie obviously wasn't going to show fucking Frank just furiously, going at it. The big thing about this is it helps to kind of like re-establish how exactly Frank comes back. Mm-hmm. In the movie, fans will know that, like, Larry, or Frank's brother, however you want to say it, Rory in the book, goes up and is bleeding on the attic floor. And in the movie, that's enough to bring Frank back. But when it comes to the book, some of what Frank had left behind in terms of like his physical essence is the thing that mixes with the blood and then kind of allows him to come back.
Gives him like a foothold.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that is one of the reasons why that whole sequence, like, he needs a way to come back, and so leaving a part of himself behind is an easy way to do that.
Yeah.
In the movie, that's not what happens. It's basically just like, why is he back? Well, because he died there.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's a very weird scene, and it's just, I feel like one of the things that puts me off with this book is a lot of times the motivation of characters isn't super gone into. Like, it's a novella, it's a short book. It just seems like at a certain point, like, I guess once he solves the box, it's obviously beyond the point of no return. But like, Frank, in the discussion, Frank is obviously like, he realizes he's like probably been misled, and instead of like, maybe backpedaling a little bit, he still agrees to like whatever the deal is of like telling them that he wants extreme pleasure or whatever, even though it's obvious, probably should be obvious that is not what he's going to be getting. Obviously, he saw that they stepped out of hell. They didn't step out of some paradise. He thought he was going to be, he thought like by summoning the Cenobites, he was going to just basically be like given a harem of like, basically, bimbos that would, give his every pleasure, but instead he's confronted by these misshapen beings that look like they've had chains and pins sewn through their flesh and scars and all kinds of horrible, tortures put upon them. And instead he like just, I don't care. My dick's tired. I want more pleasure. I don't care. And he just kind of forges ahead. It's Frank. He's a bad guy. And we'll get into it with a little bit with Julia, and her motivations make even less sense than what we saw in the with Frank. But
and this is where I have to kind of disagree here, because I think that her motivations, while they are a bit sketchy in the book, because another big difference between both book and movie is that in the book, the events that take place with Julia are described far more non-consensual in nature, or at least that's how they start.
So like it basically describes her. So basically, Frank, she's at some party at this house, and like she runs into Frank, and Frank basically like jumps her bones immediately. with a ferocity that if it was not consensual, it would be by some considered rape, I believe is almost a direct quote.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going with there.
Yeah, but
the thing about the book is that memory is described as something that she has kind of like warmed to over time, because now she's in this loveless relationship with Rory. And so, now looking back at it, she misses Frank.
That's the thing with I don't like her motivations for why she doesn't like this guy don't mesh. It's just because she doesn't like yes, it's like a loveless marriage, but it's just like it's boring. Therefore, I'm going to talk to a freaking horror show of the eyes and the spine and attempt to go straight to murdering people. There's no sort of they basically skip over any kind of discussion that would have happened and just go straight to I'm gonna murder some bitches.
Well, I mean, I think
I don't think her her whole thing was Rory. Rory's just kind of there. He's he's just cast as a boring guy. She doesn't have any sort of never has any sort of thing for why she doesn't why she's so sort of disgusted by him. Even it's just sort of up in the air, and I didn't.
That's kind of the point, though. I mean, I think that just him being so boring, so, for lack of a better word, vanilla when it comes to because she had his brother, and his brother was nothing like him, and I think that has in a way kind of colored her perception on what it should be, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like the kind of people who once they have something, and then you go down to something else, it's it's not the same anymore. You know what I'm saying? You've gone to such an extreme that everything else seems dull now. I mean, again, I might be reading into it a little too much. This is a really
maybe there's stuff that's in the movie that I didn't.
Well, I mean, I think the movie does a better job of kind of setting that up per se. Because I do think that, there are some things regarding the movie that, in terms of changes and whatnot, in terms of pacing and so on and so forth, work a lot better. It's almost like Clive Barker was workshopping his ideas in this book. Yeah, and then when he finally got to do the movie, he was able to flesh some things out and be oh, okay, this is what I want to do with that. This is what I want to do with that.
It's like the novella was a pitch for the movie.
To a degree, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this came out, quite a bit early. Well, not necessarily that much earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Because I'm trying to think, when was the first movie actually?
The novella was published in 1986.
Yes, magazine. And the first Hellraiser movie was a year later, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the next year.
Yeah, so I could see how this essentially could be, not necessarily the elevator pitch, but this could be, easily tied directly into the movie, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the part of the issue with this book, and it's probably could be attributed that it's a novella, but the pacing is off in this entire book. I feel because basically you end up with her meeting Frank. And then the very next chapter, she's at a bar, basically, it ends up with it's hello, Julia. And then the very next next chapter, she's at a bar, basically trying to find her first victim.
Yeah. Again, I won't deny that there are some sequences from book and movie that translate a little bit better to the screen. One of the changes that I think also works in the movie's favor is that Kirsty is changed from this person who's just more or less kind of friend zoned by Rory
Yeah.
And in the movie, Frank's brother actually has a daughter, and that daughter is Kirsty.
Oh.
So she's changed from this kind of obsessive friend to the daughter.
Yeah, it's his friend that's like concerned for Frank and wanting to catch Julie in an affair to that kind of would make more sense when I think about it.
Yeah. That also helps the line, that kind of identifies Frank at the very end where it's like, come to daddy.
Oh, I didn't catch that one.
Yeah.
I thought it was meant to be more just like he's a pervert. But
he is a pervert in both things. But, with him wearing basically, the skin of, his brother sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now it
or her uncle.
Takes on a different context now that he's saying it to his daughter.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I feel like the maybe I just missed it, but Kirsty's are the only motivations that I feel like made any kind of sense. She's maybe she's concerned for her friend or whatever, and Rory just Rory's just a wet blanket that has seemed to figure out that he's all right, my wife doesn't love me anymore for whatever reason. Because I'm not fully sure of the timeline.
I think it's left intentionally vague, but I believe it's several months after Frank dies.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it seems like Frank basically disappeared right after their little tryst happened. Is kind of where I'm kind of.
Oh, you're talking about when Frank and Julia were together and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that they very much Frank dips immediately once it's over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just, like I said, I get she's trapped in this loveless marriage or whatever, but and she's bored, but I don't get how that goes immediately to murder, murder, murder. Just because she got for lack of a better word, dicked down by this man who's apparently a sex god or something. I don't know. There's certain themes in this book that just there's a little bit, I know it's 1986. There's a little bit of misogyny going on throughout. There's a bit
that's definitely something
misogyny thread going in throughout this whole book that it's oh, there's I get it's told from the point of view of Frank for a huge amount, but it's even when it's Julia's point of view, it seems there's a whole lot of it kind of just goes down to that.
What do you mean?
I feel a lot of times there's a lot the threat of misogyny even from the.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Is even occurring in Julia's point of view. She. I'm having trouble forming a thought around it, but it's sort of
it's internalized misogyny.
A little bit. I think just there's a little bit of the Clive Barker just doesn't seem to like women very much.
I don't know if I'd go that far on it, but I can understand what the sentiment you're trying to get across here. Mm-hmm. I do think that obviously coming from
trying to tiptoe around that.
Yeah.
And it's just,
and I think that is partially due to Frank in this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's where a lot of it comes from. You know what I'm saying? Frank is not he's not big on consent.
No, he could care less. Doesn't really, as long as he gets what he wants.
Yeah. He's and I think that is maybe something that seems because Rory in this, he seems so vanilla by comparison, and yet it's more like he's just more of a decent guy. He's just a guy. He's just there.
That's what I don't get. Like, I'd get it if he was like, there's some form of like. See, I think I'd understand it more like Julia, if it was like why she was like looking for an escape. If he was like at least like, verbally abusive or something, but like instead it's just like the entire time he's like. She just has this like contempt for him that doesn't seem to like measure up. Hold on a second.
Well, I think that it's set up okay. For those of you who are currently watching, first and foremost, tomorrow is Monday, tomorrow is Tuesday. So, of course, the day after that, we will be streaming our normal D&D session on Wednesday. Don't forget to check out tabletoploot.com. Nerds of Legend have a ongoing deal with them where if you put in the code NOL15 at the checkout, you can get 15% off any of the dice in their store. They also have a monthly subscription that you can jump in on, where it's $25 a month, and that will get you minimum of 4 sets of dice each month delivered to your door.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
I'm home alone with Max. So Max, I heard the doorbell ring, and my 4-year-old child immediately answered the door. So I had to run.
Yep.
So anyway, where were we?
We were talking about Julia's motivations.
Yeah, I feel like they're like it's like I don't understand like why this sort of immediate like turn to like murder and sacrifice happens when she's not even in like the book leading up to the whole Frank thing. She's not miserable. She's bored. Like it seems like she's kind of like home alone in the house all day. Rory works or whatever, and she's just bored and immediately just goes to like on a killing spree. And like I feel like I would have understood a little bit if like Rory was like the least bit sort of like mean or something, but he's just
if he had been mean, he would have just been like Frank, and I think that would have just. I don't think that like him being mean would have actually elicited the same kind of reaction. Like, because she might have actually been into that if he was. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think him being cold in the book, at least, was very much a better shorthand way of saying, like, okay, not only do these two characters contrast, but also she misses what Frank was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I agree that like in the book it's not nearly set up as well as it is in the movie.
Okay.
And that is something that I will say, that because both book and movie spends a lot of time on the characters of Frank and Julia, and I think that works the best. I think that like when they made the switch and they focused more on the Cenobites is when everything kind of like went off the rails sort of thing. I've always found Hellraiser is the most effective when it's dealing with the human subjects.
Right. It's. I feel like I agree with you there. If like you focus on the basically the Cenobites come down. They're basically like a punishment for like hubris, like or thinking, or it's sort of like an Icarus sort of thing. Flying too close to the sun and then you get burned, literally. Mm-hmm. It's not about. It's about thinking. It's about selfishness. It's about they're the punishment. They're not. They should never be the focus. I don't think. They're like,
and that's kind of where a lot of the movies that are kind of regarded as the worst in the series tend to put their focus and whatnot. Like, oh god, which one was it? Where it was I mean, the one that I can think of that is, of course, everyone's like turning point was Hellraiser 3, where Frank and Julia are no longer even in the picture. Whereas, like, Hellraiser 2, they still kind of are. But in Hellraiser 3, not only are they out of the picture, but now it focuses to the villain really kind of like being Pinhead. And that's kind of a mistake, in my opinion, because while there is a much more human element behind Pinhead, the focus being Pinhead just doesn't quite work, especially with
they're meant to be that like Lovecraftian, like you're not meant to understand them. You're meant to only see what they're basically not meant to be understood. Adding any kind of sorry, the words are escaping me, but they're not meant to, like, I think that's, H.P. Lovecraft, you have this sort of thing where they, you really only see a brief glimpse of the monsters, and it still is enough to drive you mad. And I think that's where that's what you're getting at.
Yeah. I think that's a good point to kind of like end our analysis at the moment. We didn't talk too long about this particular one, but it is a shorter book for kind of like a shorter topic. So that's been my and Ben's opinion on the book. Join us Wednesday when we do our D&D game. I've been Brian. That's Ben.
I've been Ben. Sorry about that, everyone. I had a home alone today, so.
Yep.
And to answer your question, Ava, Brian could probably get all of his dice together and recreate the rose petal scene from American Beauty with them. So that's how many dice he's got.
A lot of dice.
But thanks everyone for watching, and we'll catch you again on Wednesday.